Now, on to Amnesia. Amnesia became Amnesia when the team were complete with Penumbra and they wanted something a little bit different.
And then when we were done with Penumbra, we were like, we were contacted by her publisher then, or Black Plague, I mean, and they wanted to have a sort of expansion pack for it. They did a paradox. They made a lot of strategy games, and expansion packs for strategy games is like it's a bit easier than doing it for an action adventure, and especially sort of when you lean more on the adventure side of it. And so then we just made a puzzle game because we're so sick and tired. Oh, I don't want to think about story. I don't want to think about those things. Let's just make something different instead. And same with Amnesia. We're like, shit, not one of those story horror games. Let's try something else. And we tried something different. It totally failed. Money was running out. And then we're like, shit, let's just make another game like Penumbra. We know how to make this. Just try and make it better instead.
You can see the progression of refinement throughout all of Frictional's games, with Penumbra being the most janky and unfocused, leading to SOMA being the most detailed and filled world of them all, with every last aspect tailor-made to match the environment. But this is the Amnesia section, so let's talk about that. Amnesia professed quite a huge amount of mechanics for a walking simulator. It's really not required for this kind of genre these days. The first would be light management. The player's given two on-hand sources of light, the first being the tinderboxes and the second being the lantern. There's like over 100 tinderboxes in the game, and like, well, I mean, I went through the game trying to only collect light and use what I had in the lantern at default. It ended up pretty interestingly, and there's an interaction I'm going to talk about later on, but the point is that they actually distribute the light sources throughout the game relatively evenly. They give you just enough to use and manage, but not enough to overflow. The key here is to balance your own safety. When you're in light, you regain your sanity, and you have the lay of the land in full view. You need to, as the player, decide where and when you're going to use this resource. You're probably going to want someone backup at all times, especially for when you desperately need it. Overall, you just really need self-control.
Hanging around in the scary darkness depletes sanity because apparently we're 5 years old, but staying in the light makes it easier for monsters to see you, creating a toss-up between not getting a headache from wibbly-wobbly camera filters and not being murdered.
So yeah, light was a huge focus in this game, and in a game about making you feel terror and fear, it's a good start. Next up is Sanity, which wasn't a brand new mechanic for games in this genre, but it was certainly put on the map by Amnesia. The gist is that the more exposed you are to darkness or enemies or just nasty shit in general, the more your sanity drains. It's recorded by the brain image in your inventory, but you get the picture from the screen being assaulted by cockroaches and hearing teeth grinding, eventually leading to you having blurred vision and sort of keeling over. This sort of thing is bad when you're trying to evade enemies, so you're going to want to avoid it. This mechanic intrinsically dissuades you from looking at enemies. This is a function that's pretty much going to make it so that the enemies don't get a lot of screen time but remain a threat. Remain in the world. The darkness honestly acts as a protection for the enemies to stop them from being overplayed and ultimately becoming goofy. Aside from that, it's another resource to manage. It is important that you maintain your sanity, but you don't want to spend too much time in the light. It makes it much easier for enemies to find you. So the next and obviously iconic mechanic is puzzles. Puzzles, and more puzzles. It splits up the gameplay and makes the player engage in logical thinking, the kind that you do in your everyday life to solve your own problems. What Frictional want from it is to lull you into a sense of problem solving and suddenly drop terror onto you, arguably when you're least expecting to have to deal with it. The puzzles are simply problem solving and item slotting sort of stuff. This kind of thing can be considered too easy or whatever, but obviously their purpose is to break up the gameplay, and even though you could consider them simple...
Okay, right. Circle in... circle peg. Yeah. Ah! Was that a successful noise? I don't think it was. Wait a minute, what is this? Trinity! 4-phase! Slow cycle! Yeah, that was... Wait, no, the noise was the same. 4-phase and flow. Let's try Trinity. Flow and 4-phase. Nah, it didn't sound right. I don't care what you all think. This is the way I'm gonna do it. And you're all gonna watch. Or you can just fast forward. Ha! Yeah, got it. I'm so smart.
I mean, you gotta read the notes and everything.
Circle, triangle, square. So maybe I do have them all. Yep. Wood and metal. Trinity. Okay. Oh. Oh. I see. Okay, Trinity would be the 3. Flow would be the circle. And 4-phase would be the 4 sides. There we go.
When Frictional came to puzzles, it was imperative to once again strike a balance. You need the puzzle to be challenging, but you also need the player to complete it.
The end puzzle with the crank and pulley contraption was a tricky puzzle, not to create or on a technical level, but purely on a noticeable level. We added stuff to the puzzle perhaps 4 or 5 times because after each test session we kept having testers that did not see the piece of wood that you are to break to complete the puzzle. Originally you could only break it, so we added the option to pull it out as well. Then we added a faint light to draw the attention to it, and also tweaked the description of the crank. After that we added so that when you pull the crank there is a bit of dust falling from the piece of wood, and we also did a slight change in the angle of the piece of wood and changed the color and the texture, all to make it as notable as possible. So the question is, did you notice the piece of wood?
Different players approach different puzzles differently. The key would be that Frictional did everything they could to refine it. So did Mark and Chris see the piece of wood?
Oh, Sanity is a ... That has me quite nervous. Something is clogging the crank and pulley contraption. Okay. Everything looks good. Oh, am I missing the rope?
What have we got here? Little trapdoor action? Too heavy to lift for me? Oh, impossible. Could it be this stick? Maybe? Wow, that was a hard puzzle.
Something must be clogging the pulley. Oh, yep, okay. Nice.
The funny thing here being that Chris is the player who takes a hell of a lot more information in than Mark during exploration. This is literally because they both have very different styles and content, but this results in Chris taking the longest to find the solution. Personally, I think it's a neat little puzzle, similar to all the puzzles in the game, but the level of thought once again that goes into making sure the player sees what is involved and comes to a world-building logical solution is brilliant. As you could in real life, you can throw objects at the wood to break it, or get close enough to do it by hand. This is what Thomas was referring to by the mental model. With every piece of information the player has, they expect to be able to do certain things, and it's the developer's concern to not only understand that, but meet that expectation. The idea of multiple solutions that are all perceivable is a staple throughout the game. You're given that large amount of freedom in the provided world. The rules are established, and it's up to your creativity from there.
Escaping the cell has several solutions. In the very first version, there was only one solution to everything. Then by mistake, we had forgotten to remove the hammer item. So obviously testers tried to use it to break down the wall, complaining loudly to us when it did not work. So we added that possibility, and when doing so, all of a sudden the option was there for the player to have a metal bar item as well. So we also added a second solution on how to obtain the key in the pipe. You can use the metal bar to push it out. The original solution is to get the bucket, fill it with water and pour the water down the pipe. There is also a third option for getting out of the cell. Do you know how to do it?
Oh, I do. The 3 solutions in totality are breaking the wall with the hammer and chisel you got from earlier in the game, breaking the bar off and using that to break the wall, or finally propping yourself up to crawl out through the hole you made by breaking a different bar altogether. This is a big reason why the puzzles kick ass. Items in the world follow the same rules they do in real life, and it honestly helps players reach the solution. This is how a lot of interactions with problem solving function. You're presented with a problem, and something logical you think maybe the answer works out as well as it would in real life. This makes you feel rather clever and happy.
Oh, he takes his time eating those things. Which means I'm gonna have to do that again so that he can let me open this door. Can I put this chair in there? Or actually, let's put this inside. Can I stack up a bunch of these so it's easy for me to just walk through? Here as I can. Nice. Whoa! That actually worked. I cannot freaking believe it.
Not to really just hammer the point to the grave, but this gameplay is intrinsically tied to the horror. It's an offset to bring you down. To make things a little bit more peaceful and logical, then the tension sets in and fear makes a full comeback. Not to mention that when you solve a puzzle, you get a breath of fresh air and a cleared screen to work with. You feel good, then Frictional snatch it away from you. So another mechanic is the whole jumping around and sort of platforming thing, which is stressful as fuck when you think about falling will result in making friends with the water monster, but mostly just works out pretty well. Platforming in FPS mostly has been cringy because in real life you can get a feel for a lot more information, like where the ground is under you and making sure you get the most out of a jump, while there is a lot of guesswork in games. Amnesia doesn't use much of this, but the 2 times it does, they work out pretty well. So then there's essentially a reverse mechanic. The fact that enemies want you dead sort of creates the mechanic of hiding and looking away from them. This will be covered more in creature design, but the point is that these things know when you're looking at them, and they are very reliant on light. When you know one of them is near, you put out the lantern and sit still in the dark corner. Failing that, you run, and you run while throwing things behind you and closing doors. This shit is the progenitor of this style of horror, and it made about 10 million copycat styles after it. It populated so many fucking YouTube Let's Plays.
Ah! No! No, 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 no! Oh, go away, go away, go away, go away! Oh my god! Ah! Oh, get away from me! Take a barrel in the face, you bastard! Shut up! Ah!
Oh my god! No! Oh, he got me, shit! Oh. Run, yeah, thanks. Frick, man.
Oh. Who wants some? Huh? Oh shit! Get the hammer! Get the hammer! Fuck off! I bent right through him! What the hell? Oh! No, 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 no!
No, 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 no! No! No, 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 no! No!
The point here is that you're under incredible pressure and it's on you to perform very simple tasks like shutting doors or hiding, but the pressure makes you feel like it's almost impossible. I touched on this before, but it's a result of the mechanics put in place. Hitting enemies so that they stumble is certainly intended, but something even more interesting is that you can kill the Kaunk, or as it's more lovably known, the water monster.
Grabbing one, I tossed it at the beast and managed to kill it. How? I killed something. In Amnesia, The Dark Descent. That's not I am badass! Take that, PewDiePie!
Yeah. Badass. The point here is that there's a plethora of details in the design of the enemies that I want to talk about a little bit later, but things like this should give you a good idea of why there is something for the player to try before succumbing to a bloody death. Also, yeah, the Amnesia reviews, they're, interesting.
It is about midnight right now. I am in a basement.
Moving on, you have your physics interactions, which are more for you to pick up and check out items, make pathways, or stack them. It honestly isn't too much of a big deal that it's a feature for gameplay, but it makes the world so much more real. It really does feel like everything reacts the way you would expect it to in real life. This ties in with the puzzles, and if it does convince you of some kind of comfort, the terror becomes that much more effective. Alright, so then we have the inventory screen, which is the most gamey thing about this game. We have our sanity, health, and light resources displayed, and a bunch of items that are picked up throughout the game. It's probably the most simplistic kind of inventory screen you'll ever see, and the only other mechanical screen for this is the notes from the journal, which you won't really need if you take the game slowly. Aside from them, there is a simple risk versus reward for exploration. If you look in every nook and cranny, you'll find more and more light sources and potentially unlock some more doors that aren't even necessary to the main plot. This will keep you in areas for longer though, and many of those areas have some horrifying creatures in them. It's your classic exploration pro-con. Ultimately though, if you're not exploring, you're an idiot. Exploring is fun, kids. So all of this is bound together in the game with a series of corridors and rooms connected to a hub, and then you complete the task to progress and enter another hub, rinse and repeat. It's another example of freedom within a controlled environment. You can choose where to go first and what to put together first, but you still have to do all of it at some point.
This is one of the many hub levels in the game. And this is a design concept that we started out with in Penumbra. The idea is to give the player some freedom on where to go, but at the same time give a clear objective. In this level, the slime obstacle is a thing that the player needs to get past, and all other levels then have things needed to do so. The slime itself is one of the few puzzles left from the initial designs, and the one I'm probably the least proud of. Now that the slime appears all around, it feels a bit forced that you need to have a potion on the slime. Many testers also complained that they wanted other options in getting rid of the slime, like burning it. However, creating a potion is a central theme for this hub, so we had to let it be. I don't think it's that bad, but we probably could have redesigned it if we had time.
So something I want to make clear about the design in Amnesia that doesn't get talked about a lot is the rubber banding. What's rubber banding? It's when the difficulty of completion essentially changes based on how well you're actually doing. For example, when I was doing a run for collecting tinderboxes and oil, the oil refills were essentially empty throughout the game, while Christopher Odd was having a different experience.
Full refill. Oh, shit. This is perfect timing. Ooh, a full refill. Oh, perfect.
This kind of shit is really neat, and it's in a bunch of the design for Frictional. Enemies are literally despawned from being roaming if you die enough in the game. If you die in certain areas enough, the game will actually light it up to assist you with navigation and relieve you of some of the fear. These quality of life changes based on the player's success are all very much on purpose. The gameplay is constructed from getting the player to feel engaged and ready to refocus if they stumble. They always want the player to feel as though they have a close shave, but that they pull through. How's this for an example?
This level is the high point of the lurker build-up, which sort of started in an entrance level with the slime appearing. It's supposed to be a sort of roller coaster ride and is designed to be easy enough to be completed on the first try. Yet, it should also be stressful. Many of the things in a level that seems like you barely make it are just scripted to be that way. But it's nothing you notice because they're blended in with the truly deadly stuff.
The other big reason to prevent frustration is that frustration kills any kind of engagement you could hope to reach from a player. Frustration is the bane of fear because it removes your sense of fear and replaces it with a sense of wanting to blame, which is bizarre in a setting where you're meant to fear for your life.
The player feedback from Penumbra Overture's chase scenes were that all who completed them on the first try liked them, and those who did not disliked them. So in order to make the upcoming chase scene engaging, the idea was to make it different every time you failed, instead of forcing the player to repeat the same thing over and over. So if you have failed it once, we do our best to make you believe that now is the time when the chase will begin. This is true for other parts of the game too, but I think it's most apparent in this section. This hopefully means that however you play the sequence, it ends up being thrilling and not annoying.
Okay, so the thing that Frictional nailed in this game is something wonderful called pacing. When you're playing a fast-paced game, you're going to want as little downtime as possible. You want to be in the fight, going hard at all times. I mean, this is the same with games that are slower paced. The consistency would be key. A lot of stories tend to pace themselves in shock and awe. They give you lots of development and filler, then give you some kind of reveal or action sequence as a climax. Amnesia is paced a little bit differently. You're on edge from the start, and your only respite is from searching an area and knowing it's safe. But areas can still change. And when you approach a new one, you have no guarantees. Oftentimes it only gets worse. Frictional open with a decent amount of light and time for the player to get used to the controls, but throw plenty of stimuli to create that sense that something is very wrong. Screams and wreckage, distant sounds constantly making you feel like you're in danger, but you have to continue. The key being that you haven't seen anything yet, so there's nothing to really worry about, right? But then you hear and see evidence of creatures. Moving on, you see it briefly for a moment, and question what you even came across and how you should approach the scenario. Soon after you see one staring at you, or maybe it's its shadow. This hellish amount of sensory overload for the atmosphere is practically crushing until the moment where you finally meet a creature for the first time.
Previously in the game, it has been all about events in the past, but with these prison levels we wanted to bring it to the present, and many events experienced are happening here and now. An example of this is a prisoner being dragged off at the start of the level. Here also starts the most encounter-intense part of the game, and we were a bit unsure on how much enemies we could add. We added what we thought was enough, but after some testing and feedback, we decided to add even more. The amount of encounters experienced depends a bit on how you play the level, but hopefully you should feel constantly oppressed. Since this was the last level that this enemy has a greater part in, we did not fear overusing it either, so I think the amount of enemies here is pretty nice.
This level of pacing is phenomenal, and it sets everything up on a slow build of terror. Being in a room or a sequence with these guys is horrible, but you eventually break free from them, complete the puzzle, or open the door and are given a breather from this terrible world. Only to bring you back in. Pacing.
After the prison level, some light is needed, and that is what we want to give the player right now. We also wanted to have an environment that did not look like anything else the player has seen so far. When the player has endured the dark and gloomy dungeon levels, we wanted to give some sort of award for coming so far, and this level is supposed to be that award. The sound of water is also found quite soothing for most people, so we wanted them to relax, calm down. Only to be more acceptable for scares later on, of course.
Now then, jump scares.
What's disappointing is how the tension is all but alleviated when you figure out how these enemies work. Most of the time they'll spawn in near your location, making a really loud sound that all but alerts you to their exact position. Then they'll walk around for a bit, putting no effort into actually searching you out, before just walking away and despawning. There's a few scripted encounters that really count as jump scares that'll probably make your heart jump the fuck out of your chest, but most of the time, you simply need to just stand still in a corner somewhere, turn your back to them, and wait until they leave.
Okay, let's first ignore the fact that you used the scripted event we talked about earlier that was designed to amp pacing as an example of an enemy walking away from you. Let's pretend you didn't just criticize the game for warning you of nearby danger, but then in the same breath claim that they spawn them to attempt jump scares. No, let's just explain jump scares and how most of the internet has come to misunderstand them altogether. Jump scares would have originated in the same way surprising anybody with anything does. It's funny and or frightening, for the subject and the viewer. Now, reaching the point of being shocked enough to outwardly yell or literally move a meter out of your seat is something that you'll think back to and say either, fuck, that was scary, or you'll say, yeah, come on. If it was the latter, then the media's probably fucked up. Frictional wanted to scare people. Their majority focuses on atmosphere, but when it comes down to it, they were obviously going to explore bringing real threats in to really make you actually die. This isn't something they even needed to consider jump scares for. Take the scene you referenced as a jump scare. The GGG man lives. This is a spawn that occurs once you've exited the other side of the level that has the crumbling bit. If you approach it slowly, guess what? You get an audio cue and you know to take your time or sprint past. What I'm doing here is proving something very fundamentally kick-ass about Frictional's design. The nature of the enemies in the darkness means that you'll very likely be scared, and this isn't some creature blooping all over your face. This isn't some surprise ghoul grabbing your ass. This is a creature that's been well established at this point, jump scaring you because you decided to sprint around a place that's shrouded in darkness and filled with these fuckers. Do you think it's maybe just the system naturally punishing you for not taking it seriously? No, I guess it's just bad design. Oh fuck, you reviewed SOMA too, didn't you? I mean, the funny thing is there actually is a scripted jump scare or two in Amnesia. They're just a little bit more effective because the game lacks jump scares.
Oh, fuck! Jesus.
I mean, people can claim that jump scares are cheap. I have no problem with that. Ultimately, they'd have to give me the example before I can say they're wrong. But they still have their place in horror. And no, just because you got jump scared doesn't mean the game is necessarily scary. But it's not hard to admit that a jump scare is the process of you being shocked or scared or frightened, even momentarily. I think people just feel hard done by when it happens to them. All in all, I'm very okay with jump scares in horror games. I just prefer it when they're all natural. The kind that you feel didn't really happen to anyone else and it's a result of choices you made, not the kind that grab your stupid face and shake it until you get so disenfranchised that you just want to be able to turn them off as a feature. Besides, we all know that it's better to not blow your load early with jump scares because it's better to work in the atmosphere and do it when people least expect it. But sometimes, I guess it just works anyway.
So far, the game's done a really good job of not throwing a lot of jump scares at me, and that worries me even more. It's like, if you blow your load too quickly with jump scares... Ah! Jesus Christ! Fuck! I hate you so much!
All the things I've mentioned here have been in aid of the player's experience, and when they're building this game, it's what they've cared about the most, avoiding player boredom or frustration.
This level was changed a lot, and I think it's one of the most tweaked levels that we got. Not only was it part of the big archives level that we had to split up, but it was also hard to get it engaging enough. The problem here is that we don't have any sort of fun mechanic that we rely on to make the game engaging. Instead, we rely on story, atmosphere, and environment. This is true for many other levels and the game as a whole, but these were kind of the one of the larger levels that we made, and also one that didn't have much puzzles and such. So, when testing it, we quickly get bored with it, and we wanted to add more spooky events to spice it up. But then later on, testing proved that these events weren't that necessary, and we also felt that they were a bit lame and not fitting, so we decided to remove them. Then, the back part of the level, we wanted to make that a more linear experience, with the current player getting trapped and all, forcing the player to solve the destroy wall and find secret door puzzles. Previously, testers often missed that they can solve these problems. The level is now very different from the early designs.
Honestly though, this game really does give you the impression that what they've been going through is because of your own adventure and choices, your own gameplay. Be it literally opening doors or choosing one path before another, it makes everything feel that much more scary. Considering every mechanic I've gone through here, hopefully you understand that.
What the fuck? Holy shit! What the fuck is that? What the fuck? What the? Oh! What is that?
Oh, shit! Oh, fuck! Oh, no! Oh, fuck! Oh, shit. Oh no, I went the wrong way. Oh! Fuck! I think I'm gonna have a heart attack.
Ah, who's there? Oh shit! Oh! Oh!
Okay. Oh no!
The one thing I do want to address, though, is in about every single criticism of both SOMA and Amnesia, and that is, it's not scary once you figure out how the enemies work. This can be true. I honestly still get spooked when replaying both games, and it's strictly because I do my best to absorb the atmosphere, which we can go over later. But it's a real problem, and guess what? Every fucking horror game faces this. The horror genre is an attempt to provide you with a set of mechanics and dress them up to the point where you actually think that there's real threats. You actually get that engrossed. It is literally a part of the genre that once you figure out how it works, it will no longer be scary. So until you pioneer a way to solve that, how about you show a little understanding of why these things happen? This is why I love me some good horror. The ones that really try and make something of themselves, instead of rehashing whatever sold in the last few years over and over and over and over and over again. Oh, it looks like we're out of time. Regardless, I hope you guys had fun. That is the completion of the segment for Amnesia and gameplay. We're gonna see some SOMA gameplay next time, and perhaps a conclusion, and then maybe move on to another segment, who knows, since the gameplay segment, it may be big, but it ain't as big as the story one. We've passed that hurdle, and we're gonna keep on moving, so, yeah. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.